On today's schedule we have another GX era archetype, which was surprisingly prevalent in other Yu-Gi-Oh series after that as well. And I'm talking of course about the Ancient Gear archetype, which was first used by the Obelisk Blues professor Kronos di Medici. And yeah, this is a very old archetype, made for very brutal and overpowered beatdown strategies, which is evidenced by their first monster ever made. And they focus on disabling the opponent from activating spells and traps until the end of the damage step. So yeah, they're all about the battle phase. And after GX, the Ancient Gears were appeared in one episode of 5Ds where they were used in the by that professor who used a beat by using the cards from the students that he claimed that were trash, and then Yusei, as always, proves that nothing is trash. And then in Zexal they were absent, and then in the Arc 5 they appeared again as they were used by the Obelisk Force and of course almost every single member of the Academia. So yeah, this is supposed to be a very iconic archetype when it comes to its design. However, when it comes to playability, how does it hold up? Well, let's see with their first monster, Ancient Gear. Yeah, it doesn't have any additional names. Anyway, if you control an Ancient Gear, you can special summon this card from your hand in face-up attack position. And now, the problem I have with this is that you specifically need to control another copy of this thing in order for the special summoning condition to apply. If you control any other Ancient Gear monster, then I would have called it a bit better, because it would be a very nice 3-off staple due to the fact that it could let you continue your link plays, or maybe build up field presence for rank 2s, just saying. But as it is right now, it's not worth discussing further, although if it were a level 1 monster, then I'd think this effect would have been a bit easier to summon, since you can special summon it with 1-for-1 and all that. Next up we have their final level 2, Ancient Gear Cannon. You contribute this card. Oh, I'm trying to sneeze. Anyway, you contribute this card, inflict 500 damage to your opponent, and if you do, neither player can activate trap cards during the battle phase this turn. Wasn't this what the entire Ancient Gear archetype was supposed to be doing? Yeah, not all of them actually have the disabling effect for spells and traps, so this was made as a precaution if you happen to control a monster with no set effect, so you at least have some sort of coverage along with 500 measly burn damage, but don't run it, it's just not worth it. Anyway, next up we have their only level 3 monster, Ancient Gear Hunting Hound. If this card is normal summon, inflict 600 damage to your opponent. If this card attacks, your opponent cannot activate spells and traps until the end of the damage step. And once per turn you can fusion summon one Ancient Gear fusion monster from your extra deck using monsters from your hand or field as fusion materials. You essentially run 3 of these because the 600 burn damage can essentially edge you closer to victory. The disabling effect is a standard for most Ancient Gear monsters, and not to mention it's an archetypal fusion enabler that does not require you to have a fusion card in order to use it. So yeah, a very welcome addition in the deck. Now we move on to their level 4s, and first off we have Ancient Gear Soldier, and its only effect is that it disables back row until the end of the damage step. And this was considered perfectly fine for a card with this much stats back in the day, but nowadays we have much better cards to do a better job. Next up we have Ancient Gear Frame. You can discard one card, add one Ancient Gear Golem or one spell or trap that specifically lists the card Ancient Gear Golem in its text from your deck to your hand. You can only use this effect once per turn. If this card attacks, disable back row, and if this face-up card in its owner's control leaves the field because of an opponent's card or effect, you can special summon up to 3 Ancient Gear Golem and Ancient Gear Golem Ultimate Pound from your hand, ignoring its summoning conditions. Okay, so first of all, Ancient Gear Golem is the first monster they ever got, which we'll get to in a minute. And Ancient Gear Golem Ultimate Pound is a very bad retrain of said monster. And now without that out of the way, Gear Frame's effect is alright-ish. It can search out Ancient Gear Golem, which is something Ancient Gear is highly appreciated, along with Backrow that specifically mentions him, which is not much, but it's certainly something. And as for the second effect, well, it's there. It's not gonna go off like ever, but at least it's there if someone actually manages to trigger it. Don't know if it actually triggers if the card is face down and the opponent pops it with like something with like a man-eater bug or something. So yeah, I mean it's a decent 2 or 3 off if anything. So yeah. Next up we have Ancient Gear Box. If this card is added from the deck or graveyard to your hand except by drawing it, you can add an Earth Machine type monster with 500 attack and or defense from your deck to your hand, except Ancient Gear Box. You can only use this effect of Ancient Gear Box once per turn. It's a specific kind of searcher. It can add one. It can't add, I think, additional copies of itself. Yeah, it can't add additional copies of itself. There's one, yeah, only one other monster which Ancient Gear Box can search within the archetype, of course, and yeah, it's a very specific searcher. If you really treasure that monster, it's not very good, mind you. You can search a few copies of Box, but unless you're using like non-archetype or Earth Machines with 500 attack and or defense, yeah. It can be useful. Oh wait, it also searches with the 500 defense. Then we have one additional target, I believe. Yeah, one additional target other than the monster I mentioned. Oh, Gear Frame can also be searched with Ancient Gearbox Cannon, and yeah. Otherwise, very bad monsters can be searched with Ancient Gearbox, so I wouldn't recommend running it too often. Anyway, next up we have one of set targets for Ancient Gearbox, that being Ancient Gear Knight. This is a Gemini monster for some imbecilic reason, and its Gemini effect that it disables back row when it's normal summoned twice. And yeah, this is a very old card and a very depressingly bad card, since people thought that this much attack on an effect like this was fine when this card came out, which it certainly wasn't, and it's certainly no better nowadays, so you better not run this because it's gonna clog up your deck like crazy. Next up we have Ancient Gear Gadget, which is our final target for Ancient Gear Box if you want to search it. And if this card is normal or special summon, you can declare one type, monster, spell, trap, and this turn if a monster you control attacks your opponent's spell cards, trap cards, or monster effects, whichever was declared, cannot be activated until the end of the damage step, and once per turn you can declare one gadget monster's card name, and until the end phase this card's name becomes that monster's name. Okay, so first of all, the first effect is very underwhelming considering what Ancient Gears are supposed to be doing. The second effect is kind of confusing, since it also ties, the archetypes into the gadget archetype, which I reviewed way back when. And the reasoning for this is that some of their higher tribute monsters actually gain additional effects on one type of gadgets, that being green, yellow, or red gadget. Gain additional effects on which type of gadget was used to tribute summon it. However, the problem here being is that this thing came out in 2017 when tribute summoning was getting very much out of style unless you were playing Monarchs or any other tribute focused decks. So yeah, this is basically not worth the effort, even though it's an actually solid machine dupe target. So yeah. Anyway, next up we have Ancient Gear Wyvern. If this card is normal or special summon, you can add an Ancient Gear card from your deck to your hand except itself. Also, you cannot set cards for the rest of this turn, and you can only use this effect once per turn, and it disables back row. Okay, so you essentially run 3 of these because it can add literally any card of the archetype to your hand upon being summoned except another copy of itself, which was kind of expected with a searcher like this. Although the setting prevention is a bit weird, since, well, if you search out their trap cards, one of their 2 trap cards, Okay, one of their trap cards, because the other trap card does not have Ancient Gear in its name, so yeah, you're prevented from activating it until 3 turns, 2.5 if we want to be realistic. So yeah, Wyvern is a definite 3 of staples, and you're most likely going to be searching spell cards with it. So yeah. Next up we have our first and only level 5 Ancient Gear Engineer. Negate any trap effects that target this card, and if you do, destroy that trap card. If it attacks, it disables back row. And at the end of the damage step, if this card attack, target one spell or trap your opponent controls, destroy that target. This is literally Stealthroid, but 10 times worse, as it requires attributes in order to be summoned, and not to mention it has very pathetic stats. It negates traps that target it, which is like peak 2005. So yeah, don't run it because it's not going to make your life any better. Next up we have our one of our only 2 level 6 monsters, Ancient Gear Beast. Cannot be special summoned, and then if this card attacks, it disables back row, and negate the effects of any opponent's monsters destroyed by battle with this card, including in the graveyard. God, I would have really loved this card if it was allowed to be special summoned, because an effect like this is surprisingly prevalent in today's game. And while the stats could be a bit better, it isn't that much of an issue, because you can easily bump it up with stuff like limiter removal or any other cards which might increase attack values. But yeah, since it cannot be special summoned and it has a bit of its stats are a bit on the lower side, it's perfectly fine if you do not want to run it nowadays. Next up we have their last level 6, which is Ancient Gear Gajiltron Chimera, which is a bit of a weird name, but anyway. And this card gains the appropriate effects if you normal summon it by tributing one of these monsters. Green Gadget, this card gains 300 attack. Red Gadget, if this card inflicts battle damage to your opponent by a direct attack, inflicts 500 damage. And the Yellow Gadget, if this card destroys an opponent's monster by battle, inflicts 700 damage to your opponent. This is completely out of left field even for Ancient Gears, for what they are supposed to be doing. For the fact that this thing does not even have the back row disabling effect is also supremely baffling, due to the fact how underwhelming this thing is. And yeah, this thing basically came out in one of the Ancient Gear structure decks that was released in the early stages of the game, and it was abysmal even for that set. So yeah, and you probably won't be tribute summoning this if you're ever bringing it out, so it might as well be a vanilla monster, so don't run it. However, that monster actually received a retrain in the new support, that being Ancient Gear Hydra, which is their only level 7 monster. And at the end of the damage step, if this card was tribute summoned by tributing an Ancient Gear monster by battles an opponent's monster, but the opponent's monster was not destroyed by that battle, you can banish that opponent's monster. If this card was tribute summoned by tributing a gadget monster, you can attack all monsters your opponent controls once each. And if an Ancient Gear monster you control attacks, the opponent's spell and traps or monster effects this time cannot be activated until the end of the damage step. It's a bit more tolerable, but it's still a tribute monster with all its trimmings and downsides. First of all, again, it has higher stats, but also a higher level, meaning you have to put in additional resources if you want to actually get its effects off. Since it still much more requires tribute summoning in order for it to do anything relevant. Although the results are slightly better, but not what I would consider this to be a must-play territory kind of monster. So yeah, run by preference if anything. And now we finally arrived to the level 8 monsters, and now it's time to take a look at the Archetype's original poster boy, the titular Ancient Gear Golem. It's a level 8 with 3000 attack and defense, and it cannot be special summoned, and if this card attacks it inflicts piercing damage, and it also disables back row. Yeah, back in the day, that being very, very early GX era, this used to be a very powerful and brutal beatdown effect. If you could actually manage to get 2 tributes and get this thing out, because this thing could not be special summoned, which was basically the nail in the coffin that prevented the card from being present on the ban list for years, because yeah, this effect was actually very powerful. even for back in the day. But nowadays, the special summoning condition is a supreme thorn in the eye of the ancient gear players, and most of the new pieces of back row and support are going to be ignoring summoning conditions because that's how shit works nowadays. So yeah, might as well treat yourself to 3 of these because it's a trade-in target and it's very searchable and applicable in the modern game. What you should not run it at all is the new retrain of the card, Ancient Gear Golem Ultimate Pound. See, I would make a joke about its name, but Rada made already a perfect and exquisite joke about the name, so I won't be bothering this time, although I shall note that this thing did appear in my top 10 dirtiest card names video. Anyway, this card also cannot be special summoned. It has the exact same stats as the original Ancient Gear Golem. And if it attacks a defense position monster, inflict piercing damage, and up to twice per turn when this card destroys a monster by battle, you can discard 1 machine monster, and this card can attack once again in a row. If this card on the field is destroyed by battle or card effect, you can add a polymerization from your deck to your hand, and if you do, add 1 other Ancient Gear monster from your deck to your hand. If I told you that this retrain came out in 2008, you'd probably believe me because this is by far one of the worst retrains I have ever seen. First of all, it still has the ridiculous special summon prevention that plagued the original Ancient Gear Golem. It still has piercing damage and the back row ignoring effect. Oh wait, it doesn't have even the back row ignoring effect. It only has piercing damage, which is kind of baffling. And if you happen to destroy something by battle, you can discard a machine monster in order to enable the card to be attacking once again. Which is fine and all, but you're dumping the precious machines you might need for your plays further into the graveyard for a shitty attacking effect, which is not even good. And if it blows up by a card effect, you can search out the polymerization and an Ancient Gear from your deck, which is fine. It's supposed to enable fusion plays, but the problem lies in the fact that the archetype has their own archetypal fusion spell, which can even be fetched with a Predaplant engine employing Orphis Scorpio and Darlingtonia, which, yeah, again. And also, polymerization has other better searchers if you like really decide to run it. Although polymerization is not worth running in basically any deck that has any of their archetypal spell cards active and ready to go, if they're good, mind you. So yeah, Ancient Gear Golem Ultimate Pound is so not worth it. So yeah. And now we move on to their final level 8, which is Ancient Gear Gajiltron Dragon. If this card attacks, ignore back row, and this card gains the appropriate effects if it was normal summoned by tributing these monsters. Green Gadget. If this card attacks a defense position monster, inflict piercing damage. Red Gadget. If this card inflicts battle damage to your opponent, inflict 400 damage to your opponent. And Yellow Gadget. If this card destroys an opponent's monster by battle, inflict 600 damage to the opponent. This card, surprisingly enough, did see a competitive play. And it sure wasn't due to the amazing array of the gadget effects. No, this thing came out in the exact same structure deck as Gajiltron Chimera, and it actually saw play due to the fact that it employed the outdated ruling of their field spell, which allowed you to swarm the field with 3 of them in like no problem. But the keyword here is outdated, since the field spell has actually received an errata, which made the effect not being able to work anymore. So Gajiltron Dragon is not worth admiring any further, and we should probably take a look at its retrain, which is our final main deck monster, the level 9 Ancient Gear Reactor Dragon. It has the exact same stats as the original, and if this card was tribute summoned by tributing an Ancient Gear monster, it attacks the defense position monster, inflict piercing damage, and if this card was tributed by tributing a gadget monster, it can make a second attack during each battle phase, and if this card attacks, then it disables back row, and at the end of the damage step, if this card attacks, you can destroy 1 spell or trap on the field. You won't be tributing summoning this like at all, but thankfully this thing has a bunch of effects which can actually be used even if you didn't tribute summoning, because this is modern Yu-Gi-Oh! And this is how it basically works. But if you do somehow decide on using tributes in order to bring it out, the other effects are also pretty decent. Although the level is a bit annoying, as it's one level higher than you would most probably desire with with a monster like this. So yeah, Reactor Dragon is a definite staple in the deck, no matter what build you're going for. And now we move on to the Extra deck monsters, first of which we have the level 8 fusion monster, Ancient Gear Howitzer. It's a level 8 with 1000 attack and 1800 defense, requires 2 Ancient Gear monsters, and is unaffected by other card effects. During your main phase, you can inflict 1000 damage to your opponent. You can only use its effect once per turn, and if this card is destroyed by battle and sent to the graveyard, you can special summon 1 Ancient Gear monster from your deck, ignoring its summoning conditions. Okay, so first of all, this is a very strong start considering considering how powerful their original fusion monster was back in the day. It's unaffected by all other card effects, meaning you're forcing your opponent to run over it by battle, because other than kaiju removal, this is the only way you'll be getting rid of this thing. And if you destroy it by battle, you can basically fold into Ancient Gear Golem to further your plays, or any other Ancient Gear monster which you might need at the moment. It also burns 1000 once per turn, which is fine if you're playing a stall build or something. So yeah, Howitzer is a definite 2 or 3 of staple in the extra deck. Next up we have the level 9 Ancient Gear Megaton Golem. It requires 3 Ancient Gear monsters, has 3300 attack and defense, and if this card attacks, it disables back row. And if this card was fusion summoned using 2 or more Ancient Gear Golem or Ancient Gear Golem Ultimate Pound as material, it can attack up to that many times during each battle phase. And if this card was fusion summoned, if this face-up fusion summoned card in its owner's possession you control leaves the field because of an opponent's card, you can special summon an Ultimate Ancient Gear Golem from your extra deck, ignoring its summoning conditions. It's very good if you happen to be using 3 golems for the material. Yeah, basically, because of one of their other fusion monsters, which we'll get to in just a moment. Golem is searchable by fusion conscription, which means this thing can be very easy to summon with 3 golems. So if you summon it by using 3 golems, you have a 3300 attack beatstick which can attack 3 times, which is simply wonderful, and it also disables back row because we're talking about ancient gears anyway. However, the thing it floats into is happens to be the first fusion monster they got in GX Season 4, meaning 2008 or something. And the monster we're talking about, of course, is Ultimate Ancient Gear Golem, which even today is still one of the better fusion monsters ever. First of all, it requires Ancient Gear Golem specifically and 2 Ancient Gear monsters as material, and must be fusion summoned, and if this card attacks a defense position monster, inflict piercing damage. If this card attacks, it ignores back row. And if this card is destroyed, you can target an Ancient Gear Golem in your graveyard and special summon it, ignoring its summoning conditions. First of all, it's level 10 with 4400 attack, which is already beyond massive for an extra deck monster, bigger than Quasar in fact. It beats this stuff really hard, inflicts piercing damage, and if you happen to destroy it by any other means other than kaiju removal, you basically get your overpowered Ancient Gear Golem back from the graveyard, so you can further your plays by summoning another Ultimate Ancient Gear Golem, or another Megaton, or any other fusion monster, because yeah, this is simply an amazing array of effects for a card this old. So yeah, absolutely run at least 2 of these. Next up we have their final fusion monster, which is another level 10 Chaos Ancient Gear Giant. This one has 4500 attack and 3000 defense, requires 4 Ancient Gear monsters, and must be special summoned and cannot be must be fusion summoned and cannot be special summoned by other ways, unaffected by spell or trap effects, and your opponent's monsters cannot activate their effects during the battle phase. This card can attack all monsters your opponent controls once each, and if this card attacks a defense position monster, inflict piercing battle damage. For a final boss monster, this is certainly some array of effects, wouldn't you say? The summoning condition can be a bit costly, since lining up 4 Ancient Gear monsters, even though they can be 4 of any Ancient Gear monsters can be a bit annoying, but what you get for it is extremely worth it. And not to mention, it's also a Dark attribute monster, meaning you can use Overload Fusion for a spicy comeback option, so yeah, it's also unaffected by any back row piece, and it also shuts down monster effects during the damage step. So yeah, it's a very powerful card. Although you must win the turn you bring it out, because it's actually very prone to kaiju removal during the next turn. So yeah, not to mention you can also use Power Bond to summon it for a 9,000 attack monster, which can basically attack all the opponent's monsters, which is something certainly not to scoff at. So yeah, Chaos Ancient Gear Giant is the definitive boss monster of the archetype. Next up we have their final monster, which is the Link 2 Ancient Gear Ballista. This one requires 2 Earth Machine monsters, points bottom left and right, and has 1500 attack. And if this card is link summoned, you can add an Ancient Gear monster or 1 Gear Town from your deck to your hand, and you can target 1 spell or trap you control, and 1 face up a monster your opponent controls, destroy that card you control, and if you do, change the opponent's monster's attack and defense to 0 until the end of the turn, and you can only use this effect, each effect once per turn. This is an undoubted 3-off staple, as their newest piece of support they received very recently. And not to mention, basically it searches on an Ancient Gear monster and a Gear Town, which is their field spell, which we'll get to later. And it also triggers Gear Town's effect with the back row destruction effect. So yeah, it's a very welcome addition, and you should never ever run any less than 3 of these. Now, for their field spell Gear Town, let's get this over with a bit quickly. Both players can normal summon on Ancient Gear monsters for 1 less tribute. When this card is destroyed and sent to the graveyard, you can special summon 1 Ancient Gear monster from your hand, deck, or graveyard. So yeah, the only thing the archetype ever used in the field spell was basically the floating effect, because the old rulings for this card basically said that when this card was basically, when you activated another copy of Gear Town, the previous one would be sent to the graveyard and would be treated as if it was destroyed, and then you could basically special summon Gajiltron Dragon, and you basically repeated this 3 times, so you have 3 Gajiltron Dragons on the field, and the trick doesn't work anymore, as you actually have to pop it with yourself with an MST or one of their other support cards or Ballista. So yeah, you can run 3 of these, because it actually provides a decent pool of monsters you can special summon. It does not ignore summoning conditions, but hey, you can special summon Reactor Dragon with it, and that's always a plus in my book. Next up we have Ancient Gear Workshop. Target 1 Ancient Gear monster in your graveyard and add that target to your hand. It's a very nice card to consider having around if you're focusing on fusion spamming, which is what the archetype should always be doing at all times. Although if you're using polymerization for some ungodly reason, then this thing is effectively replaced by a fusion recovery. So yeah. As we'll see later on, the archetype, like I said a bit before, already has their own fusion enabling spell card, so yeah, this is a better card than polymerization and fusion recovery, so yeah. Next up we have Ancient Gear Tank. Equip only to an Ancient Gear monster, it gains 600 attack, and when this card is destroyed and sent to the graveyard, inflict 600 damage to your opponent. It's a shitty GX era archetype equip spell, and it's not worth discussing any further. Ancient Gear Fist is another equip spell, which says that you can equip it only to an Ancient Gear monster. At the end of the damage step, if the equipped monster battled the monster and is still on the field, destroy the monster it battled. The operative word here is after the battle phase, so it's not worth discussing, because this is again another very shitty GX era equip spell. Next up we have Ancient Gear Factory. Reveal 1 level 5 or higher Ancient Gear monster from your hand and banish a number of Ancient Gear monsters from your graveyard whose combined levels are equal to double the revealed monsters, and if you do, you can normal summon the revealed monster this turn, and you must normal summon it without tributing. Okay, so this was a way too specific kind of effect for even for the time this card came out, which I believe was around 2006. So yeah, for example, if you wanted to to summon Golem, you needed to banish level 16 worth of ancient gears from your graveyard. It was basically way too costly for all the wrong reasons, and I gotta give it some sort of credit. It's better than Mixeroid special summoning condition at least. So, totally expected thing to say. Don't run it. Next up we have Ancient Gear Castle. This is a continuous spell this time around. And all Ancient Gear monsters gain 300 attack. Each time a monster is normal summoned or set, place one counter on this card. If you tribute summon an Ancient Gear monster face up, you contribute this card instead if the number of counters is equal to to or greater than the number of required tributes. It served its purpose in the ages and ages ago, but nowadays it's pretty much not worth it since you're most likely not tribute summoning all your Ancient Gear monsters, so you might as well avoid this one. Next up we have Ancient Gear Fortress, another continuous spell card, and it says that during the turn they were normal or special summoned. Your opponent cannot target Ancient Gear monsters you control with card effects, and they cannot be destroyed by your opponent's card effects. Your opponent cannot activate cards or effects in response to the activation of Ancient Gear's cards or effects. And if this card is destroyed in the spell on Trap Zone, you can special summon one Ancient Gear monster from your hand or graveyard. And also you cannot special summon monsters for the rest of the turn except the Ancient Gear monsters. It's essentially a 3-off due to the fact that it provides an amazing array of utility, especially for an archetype this old. So yeah, it's essentially a very good protection effect, and not to mention it has some neat recovery in form of its secondary effects. It's searchable by Wyvern, so you definitely run 3. Next up we have Ancient Gear Catapult. While you control no monsters, target one face-up card you control, destroy it. And if you do, special summon an Ancient Gear monster from your deck or ignoring its summoning conditions. And you can manage this card from a graveyard to target a face-up card you control, destroy it. And if you do, special summon an Ancient Gear token, which is a machine type Earth level 1 with 0 attack and defense. And you can only use one Ancient Gear Catapult effect and only once that turn. It's also worth running at 3 because it generates resources better than most cards in the archetype, since you can basically kickstart your plays by using this, and not to mention you can also use both effects to pop Gear Town, which is certainly something to look forward to. Definitely run 3 at all times. Next up we have Ancient Gear Drill. If you control an Ancient Gear monster, discard one card to set one spell card directly from your deck, and this turn that spell card cannot be activated. Okay, it's actually a spell card which can search out any spell card in the game, which is actually mighty amazing considering we're talking about a simple archetypal spell here. It requires you control an Ancient Gear monster and to provide a discard, which is a bit costly, but again, you can search out any spell card with this thing, or even though this thing is a bit slower nowadays. But hey, I guess it doesn't hurt to run it at least one, because you can actually search out limiter removal with this, which is also highly appreciated with Ancient Gears nowadays. Next up we have Ancient Gear Fusion, which is their archetypal fusion spell. Fusion summon an Ancient Gear Fusion monster from your extra deck using monsters from your hand or field as fusion materials. And if you are using Ancient Gear Golem or Ancient Gear Golem Ultimate Pound as material, you can also use monsters from your deck as material. Oh, this is an excellent card to consider running, considering the fact that it also allows you to use monsters from the deck as material, meaning you can basically turn a few Ancient Gear Golems into a Megaton for using monsters from your deck as material, so it's essentially a very welcome choice and a definite 3-off staple, since you can also search it with Wyvern, and not to mention it is also searchable by Oath with Scorpio and the Linktonia Cobra, so yeah, run 3 at all times. Ancient Gear Explosive is a normal spell which allows you to target an Ancient Gear monster you control and destroy it, and if you do, inflict damage to your opponent equal to half its original attack. Another very token GX era burn card that has absolutely nothing to do with the archetype, so we won't be discussing it any further, even though the burn damage can be quite significant sometimes. Next up we have the last spell card. They have Spell Gear. Send 3 Ancient Gear cards you control to the graveyard, and you can special summon up to 1 Ancient Gear Golem from your hand and 1 from your deck, ignoring their summoning conditions. Then destroy all monsters you control except Ancient Gear Golems, and you cannot normal summon or set until the end of your next turn. Well, at least it was the only archetypal way back in the day for the archetype to put multiple Ancient Gear Golems onto the field without much effort. But nowadays it requires a bit too much setup here, and it's pretty much not worth discussing any further unless you're experimenting with the card. Next up we have our first trap card, which is Ancient Gear Reborn. It's a continuous trap that says once per turn if you control no monsters, you can target an Ancient Gear monster in your graveyard and special summon it, and if you do, it gains 200 attack even if this card leaves the field. You can only control one Ancient Gear Reborn. It's an archetypal call of the Haunted for the cost of controlling no monsters and controlling only one. So yeah, it does not ignore summoning condition, which is kind of annoying, but yeah, you can resummon Wyvern with this and provide an interesting search, although if you search it out with Wyvern, it's pretty much dead for 2.5 turns, like I said, so yeah, it's the only trap card that can be searched out with Wyvern, so yeah. And their final card is the normal trap Cross-Dimensional Duel. Target one Ancient Gear monster you control, banish it. During the next standby phase, return the banished monster to the field, and if you do it, its attack becomes double its original attack until the end of that turn. If one or more Ancient Gear Golem or Ancient Gear Golem Ultimate Pound you control will be destroyed by battle or card effect, you can banish this card from your graveyard instead. See, this is one of those cards that is pretty much what I would call casual bait, because this effect seems pretty okay at first, because it basically brings back an Ancient Gear monster with double its attack. It works even on Megaton and also the Ultimate Ancient Gear Golem. But the fact still remains that this is a slowly recurring trap card, which is barely searchable even with it in its own archetype, but the only saving grace it's actually the protection, which only protects Ancient Gear Golem, sadly enough. But still, it's kind of worth considering running one if you feel like it, so you can dump it to the graveyard with Foolish Burial Goods, so you can get the protection effect. Other than that, I wouldn't much bother with this one. Next up, we move on to the grading scale. So yeah, we are finally done with the archetype review. So let's take a look at this now, shall we? Consistency gets a very solid 2 out of 3, even though the archetype can actually be quite bricky at times. The simple amount of archetypal searchers is definitely enough for me to give them a 2 out of 3. Even though some of their searches are relegated to a hard once per turn, so yeah, very close to a 3 out of 3. So if they actually had a spell card which was like a toon table of contents for the sake of last video's comparison, then I might actually have been considered enough to give them a 3 out of 3. However, in terms of power, it gets a sheer 3 out of 3 because it's the Ancient Gear archetype, and I would give them a million if I could out of 3, because it was made to hit hard, and it sure does hit hard indeed, and it's certainly an area which was designed right when this archetype was in the focus. Now, in terms of comeback ability, it's pretty damn low, I gotta say, because it's a pretty aggressive beatdown sort of deck, and once you beat them into the ground, they pretty much take forever to come back from a beatdown, and it's pretty much irrelevant, so 1 out of 3 also here. And in terms of protection, well, it's another case with aggressive beatdown decks is that they barely have any protection other than simply disabling the opponent from activating back row. It's some kind of protection, I guess. And castle exists, but it's still one specific card worth of protection, and Cross-Dimensional Duel protects only one specific monster. So yeah, it's a 1 out of 3. But if the archetype had more cards like castle, then I would maybe consider giving them more than a 1 out of 3. And in terms of versatility, it gets a solid 2 out of 3. It has a very nice focus on fusion spamming, and although it's not splashable in anything other than Ancient Gears, its focus on fusion summoning is definitely the deck's strongest aspect, and yeah, it's basically why it was given this grade in the first place. And yeah, Ancient Gears also have have like one anime exclusive monster that I can think of, and yeah, while adding that monster to the real game wouldn't change anything about the archetype. So yeah, it's probably not worth waiting for it to be adapted into the real game. But this is modern Yu-Gi-Oh, and this is almost 2021 at the time of recording this video. So yeah, literally anything can happen nowadays. And alright, and now that was it for the one of the only two GX era archetypes that I had left. And now it's time to take a look at the semi-final Arc 5 era archetype that will be featured on the show. It's also part of the Rada Marathon. So yeah, I will see you guys until then. Thank you so much for watching. Stay tuned for more videos and updates. Comment, like, and subscribe. As usual, I'll upload the next vid whenever I can, and be sure to check out my Patreon when you got the time. Maybe drop a few donations if you feel like it, like I said. And I'll see you all and have a good day. Peace.